Dr. Bradley Campbell, welcome and thank you so much for being here with us today. You're a physician, author, speaker, musician. You're also the only physician to have 10 natural healthcare degrees. You also run an integrated health clinic, and you're also the Robin Hood of healthcare. Could you describe what this journey has been like for you, and what does being the Robin Hood of healthcare mean to you?
Yeah, my journey was I was left for dead by the medical community at 9 years old. I had a concussion that left me like Dory from the movie Finding Nemo. I had half my IQ, no short-term memory, and I went from a grade ahead to a grade behind in school. I saw 25 different medical practitioners and specialists, had all the tests done, CAT scans, EEGs, MRIs, psych tests, sleep studies, and they said, there's nothing you can do. You're just like concussion injured, and we have no idea. Hopefully you'll heal over time. Went to see a chiropractic physician, a friend of a friend, just by chance, because I was sick from school. My mom was in a car accident, so she brought me tagging along. And she said, you know what, instead of treating me, could you look at my son? And he was the first person in 9 months who actually just touched my head. And I had a dent in my head the size of a golf ball. And not in 9 months and 25 specialists had anybody just touched my body and touched my injury from the concussion. And so he did cranial work, which a lot of osteopaths here believe in, but a lot of medical doctors don't learn in school at all. And he basically realigned the sutures of my skull bone, my cranium, took the pressure off my brain, reduced the indent, and I was completely back to normal. So for me, that was a miraculous, life-changing experience. And for him, it was just what he sees in practice on a regular basis, because there's a lot of people who are left for dead in a similar way by the medical community. They just get put on certain medications. They get told that certain diseases or conditions are normal and there's no natural or alternative ways to treat them because they learn in school. Many medical doctors used to learn that chiropractors, naturopaths, acupuncturists are all quacks. And only until the 1970s were acupuncturists allowed to practice acupuncture in the United States. Before that, it was considered assault and battery. And you could actually go to jail for practicing acupuncture, and early chiropractors could go to jail for practicing chiropractic medicine as well. So my background is basically one of the people who was severely injured and unable to be helped by the mainstream medical community. And the alternative, which is really more of the original forms of medicine, were able to find out what was really going on and help me within an hour, which was profoundly influential on my personal development and my openness and awareness to the fact that medicine doesn't have all the answers. And so for me, I wanted to help injured musicians, and I was in a master's degree program for saxophone performance, and I started teaching saxophone and realized I just didn't like teaching it. I liked playing, but not teaching. So I figured I would help injured musicians as a career instead, and wanted to go to med school, but most of the medical doctors I knew had really bad family lives. They were really stressed out by med school, and the hours of their careers were not very conducive to running a family. So a lot of them ended up divorced or mentally unwell or on lots of medications. And they basically said, like, don't become a doctor, maybe become like a nurse or a nurse practitioner, because you can make your own hours, run your own clinic, and it can just a better work-life balance. But the chiropractor who saved my life as a child ended up convincing me to go to chiropractic and naturopathic school, which led me down the rabbit hole of learning everything I possibly could, getting all these side degrees in nutrition, neurology, homeopathy, internal medicine, applied kinesiology, trying to figure out what was real, what wasn't real, what actually worked in people, what was just placebo. Because even though I had been saved by the natural medicine community, I was extremely skeptical of a lot of the charlatans out there and wondering who was making too bold of claims and who was actually helping people on a consistent basis, and what was a placebo response and a no placebo response and all those things. And I basically vowed to learn as much as I could to help as many people as I could and give away as much of the information as possible for free to help people, which is where Robin Hooding came from. Because I started and once I finished a lot of my degrees, I wrote a book. Then I started a nonprofit, which was meant to give away that information for free. And I found out that turns out if people get things for free, they generally are skeptical or won't use it or don't want it. So I created a paid health membership that's very low cost that allows people access to that information. And then the people, it's kind of like a Patreon, the people who pay into that fund me and my videographer to release free content to the masses. So We reach millions of people a day on social media where we can educate them for free on important health topics like the dangers of certain injections and the dangers of certain medications and natural alternatives, ways to get people healthier for free. So people now have access to like free or slightly paid information. And for people who can't afford some of that information, on my birthday, February 15th, every year, we give away like month trials to the membership for free, which is like a Robin Hood day for us. And then once in a while, we'll allow our current paid members to also gift away free trial memberships to other people to get deeper levels of healing as well.
Wow, what an incredible journey. And I imagine you just have such a multifaceted array and acquisition of knowledge and experience, ranging from your personal health experience to the medical skills and training that you have developed through a variety of sources, and also then the business side of it and the business models that you've experimented with, all of which contribute to, I imagine, a really in-depth understanding of what is going on with the medical system today. What have been your biggest insights having gone down the traditional route of training to become a physician, and then with the combination of training with holistic treatments as well?
So some of the biggest insights I would say is that there are a million ways to fix one problem. So to every practitioner, they have a set of tools, like they might have a hammer and a screwdriver, but every patient is a nail. And you could find like a million ways to bump a nail into a wall to hang a painting. Like you might use a hammer, you might use a sledgehammer, you might use the end of a book. But if all you have is one tool, that's what you're going to use on every single patient. So if you're a surgeon, that's great, but you don't necessarily have all of the tools. So for me, I was trying to be sort of a jack of all trades and try to master or at least learn as many tools as possible so that I could give more individual customized medical care to people. I don't do surgery, but I think surgeons do need to be experts in their field. And what I really learned was that when you specialize in one area, you do become very good at that area, but you are no longer good at diagnosing general problems. And when all you have is that one tool, and most practitioners through school don't learn a lot of other tools besides drugs or surgery, chemo, radiation, it's basically like cut things or drug them, then that's really the only options you have unless you go for extra training outside of school. And even then it's going to be not quite as good. Like the doctors who go to medical school and then learn functional or natural medicine outside of it, they're learning it on their own time without a lot of guidance. And it might be like a few weekend seminars instead of 4 or 5 years of full-time training. So it's a really tricky world out there internationally because there are certain degrees in some countries that are very legitimate and in other countries are like a weekend training or like a 6-month online training. Naturopathic medicine being one of those degrees that in the United States can be very regulated in some states and completely unregulated in other states. So I've learned there's a lot of degrees of variation in medical training, experience, knowledge, and clinical performance. But the people who generally get the best results are people who have more than one tool, who learn a lot of lifestyle medicine, and they learn how to treat the person, not the disease. Because one disease like insomnia or anxiety could have 20 different root causes. So they really look for the root causes. They take the time, which is hard to do in an insurance-based healthcare model. They take the time to get to know why something happened for somebody and go through their whole life history and the whole condition history. And they treat the person and all those root causes, not the disease, which is extremely crucial to getting people better.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and something which I've experienced on the other side of the table as a patient, and I'm sure for many people listening is the case as well, where you are treated for the symptoms rather than there being any attempt to get to the root cause of the issue. And it does make you question what healthcare actually means if we are not collectively caring for people's health, which brings us on to a specific issue within the conversation around healthcare and well-being that we are going to talk about today, which are benzodiazepines. And these are a very, very commonly prescribed class of drugs. They are your likes of Xanax, your Valium. We see them everywhere in popular culture. and they are highly dangerous, which isn't as common knowledge as the common knowledge of the drugs themselves. Benzodiazepines, aka benzos, are kind of at the intersection of both of our experiences and also perhaps symbolic of many of the issues that are going on in Western medical healthcare today, both in the UK and the US and further beyond. Would you be able to just describe what benzos are and what they are typically prescribed for with patients?
Yeah, benzos are a class of medications called benzodiazepines, which are more of the depressant form of psychiatric medications. So they help people to sleep, to relax, to reduce muscle spasms, to reduce seizures in some people. The common ones are Valium, Xanax, Ativan, Klonopin, sometimes Halcyon. They have the medical names as well, the alprazolam, diazepam, lorazepam, oxazepam, prazepam, quazepam, clonazepam, diazepam. So they're very effective. They are very powerful medications, but they have an extreme reaction, people who try to stop them, which is extremely dangerous. Going cold turkey off of these medications can actually kill people. So it's one that basically makes you completely dependent on the medical system or your prescribing physician, potentially for life, because most medical doctors do not have any intentions of getting people off of these medications. And tapering off of benzodiazepines, as you know, can be extremely difficult. And I've had friends personally where doctors told them just to cold turkey stop taking them, and they ended up in the hospital because they had insomnia for weeks, which can be deadly. So it's one of those things where they're extremely effective. People who go on them usually become addicted very quickly, and they're like, wow, this is a miraculous drug. But the downside is the more powerful some of these medications are, whether it's like painkillers or benzodiazepines, the harder they are to come off and the riskier they are as well.
Yeah, it's a terrifying concept, and maybe something we'll swim back around to in a minute, but it's just still shocking to me how, by and large, patients just aren't aware of everything you've just described. It's astonishing to think that 35-second to 40-second bulletin of information, really important information about benzodiazepines, is not really often understood even by those prescribing the benzodiazepines. And I think anybody hearing this, to hear how dangerous these drugs are and how commonly prescribed they are, and that there's a lack of understanding on both sides of the table, both with patients and medical professionals a lot of the time, that is quite shocking to wrap your head around. And it was for me, and it still is. As you know, I cold turkeyed myself, believing it was the absolute safest thing to do. And I was in the UK at the time and felt very much like my life was in danger. So I was calling 111, which in the UK is our sort of non-emergency helpline. And it was at the point where they told me to stop calling, and they actually laughed at me and they said, there's nothing wrong with you. I think it had been a few times that week that I'd called. I'd said, I feel like there's a poison running through my body. And they had sent a doctor over to do some basic obs at home and found that nothing, quotes, was wrong. And that was the end of it. And this is another aspect of this. This kind of injury does not show up in blood tests and in all the typical things that Western medicine typically uses to discern whether there's a medical issue or not. When you're going through a neurological central nervous system injury, it just doesn't show up in these tests, and this compounds the problem so easily. So just following on from that, why are these so risky? What do they do to the brains and bodies of people that are prescribed them?
I want to try to keep this like as simple as possible, but what the benzodiazepines do is they basically impact like your GABA receptors in your central nervous system or your brain and spinal cord. So they basically they bind the receptor sites, I believe, of GABA. So what that means is it increases the ability of GABA to work. And GABA is one of the main brakes on your nervous system. So GABA aminobutyric acid basically helps your brain slow down. And so what this is doing is it's increasing the GABA and helping your brain be more calm, more drowsy, more sleepy. And it works for a prolonged period of time. And it also can, over time, reduce blood flow to the brain, which can cause actual like brain matter loss if used for years. So what it does, I would say it's basically like putting the brakes on your brain and slowing things down. It almost, in some people, can cause hypnosis as well. So it's sort of putting you into like a subtle hypnotic state when sort of like as if you were to have a few glasses of alcohol and you're a little bit like sedated, but that's just your normal everyday running straight. You're not like toxic in your liver per se. You're not necessarily like toxic elsewhere, but your brain is just in this sedated state and numbed out type of state. So that's probably the simplest way I could explain it. But I can go into more detail if you'd like.
No, that's great. Thank you. And the next question, feel free to answer this in any which way you would like, obviously. What are your personal feelings around benzodiazepines as a human being aware of what's going on and being one of the few that possibly is aware? And how does that marry up with your professional experience with benzodiazepines as a medical practitioner?
My professional experiences is that they basically ruin the life of every single patient I have ever seen been put on a benzodiazepine. And I've seen people go on them for extremely benevolent reasons. They've been put on them after the trauma of 9/11, September 11th, 2001 in the United States, because people had insomnia. I've seen people with extreme anxiety disorders been put on them and they worked for their anxiety. I've seen people been put on them because of chronic migraines and chronic pain conditions. But there are alternatives like there are even natural alternatives, and there are different medication alternatives like SSRIs, SNRIs, beta blockers, buspirone. There's a number of other anti-anxiety medications. The real problem I see with benzodiazepines is the chronic long-term abuse and dependence that it has, and the addiction that most every patient I've seen ever go on it has. Because when they try to stop, when the reason for the anxiety goes away, they can't stop, and they become addicted or physically, chemically dependent on the benzodiazepines to live a normal life. And it can cause secondary issues as well. Like there can cause secondary sleep issues, secondary pain issues. It can cause gut issues. There's a number of issues that come from taking benzodiazepines. And then the chronic long-term use tends to impact the brain as well. Dr. Daniel Amen talks a lot about this in the Amen clinics. And it's really just one of those things where whenever I have a new patient who comes in on a benzodiazepine and has been on them for over a few months, I start kind of like cursing in the back of my head, because I know that this is going to be a long time for this person to get better, and that going through a taper might require an inpatient or outpatient treatment facility that they may or may not have the finances for. So getting someone to withdraw from benzos is one of the hardest possible things in all of medicine and in my practice. So it's honestly the medication that I wish people in practice were on the least and practitioners use the least. And I think people should know before ever getting prescribed one that getting off of it could be the absolute hardest thing they ever do in their entire life.
Yeah, and it's almost beyond words to know how to respond to that, because it's just so incredibly validating to hear everything that you've just said when you've lived through it. And obviously everything you've just said, I can completely back up and fortify. And knowing how to describe what this is actually like to people is so difficult. It's this otherworldly experience, which there just doesn't seem to be enough words to accurately convey what this is actually like. And that's why it's so shocking that these are so readily given out for benevolent things and also for relatively benign things. I know people that have gone on them and been injured by them because they just wanted to feel more relaxed when taking airplanes, and took them every once in a while for going on flights. And in my own case, I look back and I genuinely do not think that I ever needed a benzo. It was given as the first port of call, not the last. And I don't think I ever would have got to the last. I probably just needed rest and treatment for my lung issues, which is what caused the anxiety in the first place. I couldn't breathe properly. So had that been treated first, it would have been a different story potentially. Because of the severity of the risks with these, what measures are doctors taking to weigh up that cost-benefit analysis of prescribing a benzo before they're actually handed over to a patient? And I'm going to say I presume that those measures aren't there just based on the stats and based on my own experiences and conversations with others that have gone through this and this conversation. So maybe that's a part to this question. Why aren't those measures in place?
That's kind of the ultimate question, is like, why is medicine as bad as it is? And, it could be because it takes a long time for medicine and medical practice and orthodoxy to change. Even when something is discovered as being extremely harmful, it often takes 2 decades for it to come off the current prescribing regimen. So it's a lot faster to educate the general public, as you're trying to do on these measures. You can educate doctors, but for it to take time to trickle into medical textbooks, it takes a long time. And so a lot of the conspiracy people or the people who just say follow the money will look towards the money and say, look, the benzodiazepines make a lot of money. So potentially it's doctors needing to prescribe certain things because they make more money off certain pharmaceuticals than others. It could be because it's just so effective that doctors like the fact that it saves them time because they don't have to see someone 3 or 4 times to try to find the right medication for them. It could also be doctors who need a long-term relationship with a patient or want to create a long-term relationship with every benzodiazepine patient, because then they're going to be a medical customer for life. So you could take kind of the negative worldview that doctors are trying to make more money or create more long-term patients. It could be that they just don't know yet either. There are a lot of doctors who don't really know the long-term risks. And some of the trainings, the clinicships and rotations that doctors go through are through bad doctors. Say 50% of doctors are dumber than average, 50% are smarter than average. And the 50% who are dumber than average might not ask those questions of like, are there better options? And the doctors are often taught to ignore what the patient says if it doesn't fit into their worldview. Like you said, people didn't believe you when you said, hey, I went off this medication and I can't sleep and my heart is racing. I'm having all these issues. Some people get seizures or life-threatening. And they're just sort of told to say, oh, that can't possibly happen. It couldn't possibly be a medication withdrawal or medication toxicity. It couldn't possibly be from an injection. It couldn't possibly be from anything that I did because I went to the best medical school in the world. I learned from the best doctors and they never even heard of this. But doctors don't have enough time to listen to their patients, and they don't really have time to do follow-ups with their patients, which is why a lot of patients end up being medically gaslighted, which is basically when the patient is told their experience of reality is false or untrue. And it's a very, very slippery slope, because there are some times when patients get things wrong, they make mistakes, as we all do. They might say like, oh, I thought that this apple was poisoning me because I had the apple and I threw up. But like, little did they not tell you that they just drank like a whole bottle of vodka right before the apple. So it's not the apple that made them throw up, it was the bottle of vodka. But doctors are often in their training taught to believe that the patients are stupid and that they're smarter than the patients. And most of my training was with really kind, caring doctors who said, if we want to get the patients better who are not being helped, we have to listen to our patients, believe them, and know that they know their body better than anybody else. And there is this paradox in medicine, which is that he who is his own doctor is a fool, but you also are your own best doctor and healer. So you, as a patient, both have to be as aware and mindful and pay attention and be your own health detective and try to be your own doctor, because you're the one who's taking care of yourself every day. But at the same time, it's good to try to collect information from people who listen to you, who care about you, try to get to know you, and use that information to see what rings true for you and what to do about it. But the unfortunate fact is that a lot of doctors are taught that patients are not smart, that they're stupid, their stories can't be trusted, and that their school, their training teaches them everything they need to know about health and medicine.
Yeah, and then that just compounds the whole issue, because if you've got people that are going through a living hell and suffering immensely, and they're being gaslit and they're not being supported, And then that filters down through or from the medical professionals to their loved ones, their families, who are saying, well, your bloods are fine. The doctors have said you're fine. It's in your head, or you're anxious, or you're depressed, or you're fill in the blank. It just completely takes what's already a very extreme situation and blows it up into something that's very, very hard for any human to tolerate.
Yeah, that's one of my biggest pet peeves is when they say it's all in your head. It's like, well, the benzodiazepine reaction is all in your head, right? It's like it's in your central nervous system. It literally is in your head, and your head, your nervous system controls every cell in your body. So if it is all in your head, it'd be like, great, let's look deeper at my head. And blood work is not going to pick up almost ever what's going on in your head. It's not going to pick up a lot of medication reactions. It's not going to even pick up levels of toxicity. Most vitamins and hormones can barely get tested, or they barely even test for those things. But these medications have severe central nervous system impacts. Even just if I read right off the Medscape app, right, which is what every doctor has available to them, you get 50% of people who go on them feel impaired coordination, which means should they be even driving? Should they be doing heavy machinery operating? If 50% feel it, that means that most everybody has an effect, right? It's going to impair your coordination, whether you notice it or not. Going on these medications will impact you. And that is one of the biggest myths in all of prescribing medicine, is that just because a patient doesn't feel something or notice something doesn't mean that it's not negatively impacting them. It's kind of like people who are like, I can have beer and wine all day and I feel fine. I can still function. Doesn't mean it's not impacting your liver in a negative way. Someone who has marijuana, even one dose of marijuana, your reaction time is delayed for up to 9 days. So pilots who fly planes, they're not allowed to have marijuana within 9 or 10 days of flying because it can slow their reaction time. So in the same way, a benzodiazepine can slow your reaction time, impair your coordination. And just because 50% of people in the clinical trials reported it doesn't mean that it's not impacting everybody. There also was 35% of people with increased appetite, 35% of people with fatigues, 80% had drowsiness, 35% reported memory impairment, irritability, increased or decreased salivation, cognitive disorders. We have 30% even with insomnia, even though the medication is meant to help insomnia. 30% have decreased appetite, 30% have headaches, lightheadedness, pain in their joints, constipation, diarrhea, gut issues, nausea, vomiting, weight change, 20% with nasal congestion, 15% with increased or no libido, menstruation disorders, hormone disorders, or urinary disorders. And that's like just getting started. So if that many people are noticing problems, how many people are having negative impacts with their libido, with their joints, with their gut, with their head, with their mental status, and just completely unaware that it could be related to their medication?
Yeah, it just beggars belief, doesn't it? There have been many times over the 7 years of going through this, and over the past few years in particular, where I've understood more and more about what's happened, where it's just felt like a thriller movie or a horror movie, and you're discovering all these stats and facts, and it's just quite mind-blowing when you understand what is going on and what has been going on for literally decades. When you read all the effects out and you see the depth and severity of the symptoms, but then also the scope of the issue. Like you were saying, 50% experience impaired coordination, which is huge when you then marry that up with the stats that 1 in 4 Americans are on a benzodiazepine. And these were pre-pandemic stats. And we know it's global, but we don't know what the stats are around the world. So you've got actually 1 in 8 Americans pre-pandemic stats that are working, driving around, taking care of their kids with impaired coordination and possibly not being fully aware of it. And this is another massively shocking element to this, is there are no long-term studies on the effects of benzodiazepines on people's health. And yet they are being given out and have been given out for decades on a long-term basis. So you're just feeding people a drug that's highly potent without knowing what it's doing to them, and then also not feeding them from the people who have been aware of the negative effects of these drugs, not feeding them that vital information that can help people make informed decisions. And I think what I find really interesting is the thought that if a gas was emitted into the atmosphere tomorrow that had all the same effects of everything you've just described. So 50% will end up with quite severe impaired coordination or some impaired coordination. And there'll be a percentage that have heart palpitations, that can't function properly, extreme fatigue, cognitive issues, insomnia for weeks on end to the point where it's deadly, risk of seizures. There would be a coordinated, concerted effort by governments and international organizations to find out what that was and how to cure people, how to help people.
I just wanted to ask real quick, what was the stat you said? Was it like 25% or what percent of people were on them?
Yeah, it's 1 in 4. It's actually more than 1 in 4, but I just keep to saying it's 1 in 4 to sort of stick to accurate stats.
Yeah. Wow. That's insane.
I don't know if you've heard of Benzo Information Coalition, but they are an amazing organization run by medical professionals, I believe, that have gone through benzo injury themselves. And on their website, it states that 10 to 15% of people that are on a benzodiazepine, prescribed benzodiazepine long term, will end up seriously injured. And this is why these conversations are so important, because people are getting injured in real time. More and more people are going on benzos because of the COVID pandemic. We know that it's an exponentially increasing issue, but is that awareness exponentially increasing at the same rate? I would guess not. So this is why the awareness is just so important. I've done a few podcast episodes now, and this is my first time actually filming for the film. And usually I have my list of questions and I know roughly what I'm going to say and probably the sort of rough direction of the conversation that it's going to go in. But this is the first time that my mind is just so abuzz with all the things that we've discussed, not just because it's such a massive issue, but because of how deeply personal it is too. In your opinion, do you think this is a ticking time bomb? And how much of a ticking time bomb do you think it is?
I think the bomb has already gone off. Like, I think this is already impacting our countries to an extreme level, because if people are having memory issues, impaired coordination, etc., that's impacting us now. It's impacting parents raising their kids. It's impacting people at their jobs. It's impacting people just day to day in their lives and in community. And if you have 12% of it's like 1 in 8 people who are mentally impaired and not aware of it, almost like they're drunk all the time, how would that impact your family or loved ones? Like if you had a parent or you had a friend and they were just drinking all the time, of course that would impact you. And so we're walking around in a country where more than 10% of the people are impaired. And that's pretty terrifying. You're driving on the road with people where like 1 in 10 is cognitively impaired. And so in the US now, since the pandemic, 44% of people have been labeled like a mental health disorder. So there are people who are mentally unwell everywhere. Almost every other person is mentally unwell. So that's definitely impacting our community, our sense of self. It's impacting every single aspect and layer of society, both a small scale and on a global scale as well. So I'd say like the bomb is already off. We just have to figure out what to do about it now.
Yeah, absolutely. And that links in with the benzo epidemic in itself and the wider issue of the mental health crisis around the world. And ultimately, how we deal with this collectively is one of the biggest issues of our time, because how can we possibly then face all these other issues at play in our world today, and especially through the Western medical system, if such a significant portion of the population are being diagnosed with a, quote, mental health issue, and then being filtered, sort of pushed through this funnel of being given these so-called treatments that are making a significant portion of people very ill or worse. I don't know if you've heard of, there's a few benzo-related films, documentary films out there, a couple of which are As Prescribed and Medicating Normal, which are both brilliant names for this issue. And Medicating Normal in particular, I think just really, really highlights a key problem with this and a key part of the puzzle, which is there are so many people that are being put on these drugs for having a very normal human reaction to life, whether it's somebody losing somebody they love, or in my case, having a virus and not being able to breathe properly for a year, which inevitably led to anxiety, or somebody being really stressed at work and struggling to sleep. And so we have this real cultural problem, both with the pressures that culture and society is placing upon its populations, but then also with the cultural understanding of what mental health and mental health core issues actually are. So navigating from prescription harm to holistic healing, how do you work with holistic treatments, and how can somebody who is maybe listening or watching this, how can they start to explore avenues of holistic healing? So I'm just going to pause the podcast briefly here to add a short disclaimer around the term prescribed harm and holistic healing. So this is very much within the container of this conversation, that there are many people that have been harmed by prescription medicines such as benzodiazepines. But I think it's really important to also say that there are many prescriptions that do save lives and that do heal and that do help. And this is a very non-black and white issue. There are a lot of gray areas. And in my own experience, I was being given steroid treatment for my lung capacity that had been depleted to 60% because of a virus, and simultaneously was being given a benzodiazepine. So even sort of within the very small world of my own experience, I had one drug that was saving my life and one that was arguably killing me, and that I've since found out I was lucky to have survived. So there is this real mix of nuance in the world of prescription medicine and healing in general. And likewise, there are, I'm sure, holistic treatments, possibly holistic practitioners that maybe don't have patients' best interests in mind. Might work for one person, might not necessarily work for somebody else across the spectrum of both prescribed medications and holistic treatments. It's really important to exercise caution when making these sort of sweeping judgments or statements about healing and well-being and treatments in general, whilst also not being closed off to the truth and the complexities of what is going on.
I usually try to refer people to a practitioner. I think the resource you gave, the benzoinfo.com, is a great resource. They have ways on like supporting people with deprescribing. There's different like Instagram accounts that I'll refer people to learn more. The Ashton manual is a pretty decent start, but I think you have to find a practitioner to work with who's helped people in that process before, whether it's in person or virtually, because there's other issues that come up. The root cause of whatever issue that you had in the first place of why the benzo got prescribed often comes up, and you might need different medications to help you with some of the side effects of the tapering. And going off of them is different for everybody. Everybody gets slightly different symptoms and reactions. So you can't just tell everybody like, oh, just take like magnesium, or, you know, like the magnesium threonate or an inositol or a glycine or a blood pressure medication, because it's going to be very different for everybody. So I think the main thing is to have people go slow, to work on every other aspect of their health first, like try to get their diet and their lifestyle and their stress in check as much as possible. To eat as well, to sleep as well, to work out, to move your body, to get outside as much as possible, especially for sunrise and sunset, but get outdoors as much as possible. Maybe consider getting like a red light machine or doing some hot and cold therapy if your nervous system can handle that. But I think the more we can optimize our overall health, the easier the taper process goes. And depending on what other medications people are on, you might need a prescriber who's willing to help you get off of those medications. Because going cold turkey, as you said, could be extremely dangerous.
Thank you. That's really useful information. And another irony of this is that when people are so injured by benzos or other medications, because unfortunately iatrogenic injury isn't just unique to benzodiazepines, it's sad that it's then the responsibility of the patients who are already injured, cognitively, physically impaired, to then go and find this information out, which is where this support system is so needed, and where doctors, if every doctor was as informed and caring as you are, we'd probably be okay. But unfortunately, that's often not the case. And I think that's where it's really important for friends, family, and those close to those that have been injured to help out as best they can, to then equip those that have been injured with the tools that they need to keep going from strength to strength on this kind of staircase of healing, whether that's with sleep, nutrition, red light therapy, neuro retraining, meditation, whatever it is, so that we can alleviate this sense of overwhelm that quite often happens. And that in itself can be deadly for people going through this. And then find those initial things that allow people to grow from there. Is there something you'd recommend to patients and their support systems out there that could maybe be that first step?
First steps. I would say the first step is always awareness. So just go do a little bit of research. Maybe look up your film. You're probably listening to it. Maybe, or, it's like follow your account, follow other accounts, or talk to people who have been through this, and try to do that first. And the second thing, after the awareness of like, how bad is this medication? Maybe look at Dr. Amen clinics and Daniel Amen and his talk on benzos. But I think the second step, and the way to do the first step, is to remember to stay hopeful and know that your body is innately intelligent. And it's this duality, this polar, like, I don't know, it's kind of contradictory, but it's like this one side that says your body is innately intelligent, it's doing the best it can with what it's had, and that you can get off these medications. It might be difficult, and it takes some time, but it is doable. Your body is very strong. And this other side sort of telling you that you're also a victim. Your brain, your body might have been hijacked by these medications. And a lot of what's going to happen is not your fault. It's not in your control, and you have to surrender at the same time. So it's both this polarity, this contradiction of like, you're really strong and you're a little bit, harmed as well. So you kind of have to be know that you are a victim and you are your own savior at the same time.
Yeah, I think that's a really important element to recognize. And that can be really hard to balance. I think it's a challenge to not be too victimized and let the anger overcome you, because obviously that's not conducive to healing and doesn't allow you to be in this parasympathetic state of healing and allow the nervous system to heal. At the same time, it's perfectly normal and healing to recognize and feel those feelings. So I think it comes down to balance, as you say, and personal responsibility and health sovereignty, recognizing that you were wronged and acknowledging it's human to feel all kinds of things about that, but also realizing that we still have power within us to heal. And that from this point forward, we are in control of and responsible for our attitudes and actions that ultimately lead us further towards healing or further away from healing. To any doctors or medical professionals that are listening to this who perhaps believe that benzos are safe, and I've met quite a few of them who believe that after a 4-week withdrawal, you'll be fine and your life will just kind of bounce back to normal. What would you say to them? And perhaps to the friends, families, communities of those that have been injured that just don't believe that this is happening or it's as bad as people say it is?
I would say if you're not testing, you're guessing. That would be the nice side of me, the cancer rising. That would say, if you're not testing, you're guessing. And I would say, if you're doing brain scans on people like Dr. Amen Clinic is doing it, or you put someone on a moderate dose of a benzodiazepine and test their brain now and test it in 10, 15, even 5 years, you'll see the changes that will horrify you. And most of you are not doing that testing. The harsher side of me would say, put yourself on these medications and put all the people you love and care on them, and then go talk to them, because you're probably going to have a more care and experience for them. So if you really think it's fine, go on it yourself, put everybody you know on it, and then come back to me in 3 years and tell me how much it's ruined your life. Straight up. It's like,
I second that, and I'd be lying if I said I hadn't had those thoughts too.
It's like asking someone to like go on heroin or like meth or coke. It's like, you wouldn't tell anyone you love to do that, but yet doctors somehow think that like a little dose of that seemingly is okay.
Right. And like you said at the beginning, many practitioners do not have the intent to actually bring their patients safely off this, or even if they do, they don't necessarily know how. Or you've got practitioners that are advising patients to cold turkey a benzo, the way that I've tried to describe this to people in the past. And just a little note here that this is purely my observation on my own experience, but this is the truth of how it felt for me, that it did not feel that different from being kidnapped by a doctor, put in a room in the middle of nowhere with the door locked, and being forced to take heroin or something akin to that every day for 4 years, and being let out during the day to kind of, quote, go live a normal life. But I couldn't tell anybody about what was happening. And then at the 4-year mark, be cold turkeyed off it and just left to deal with the aftermath of that. And then you're just left in that room for 5 years, pretty much by yourself, wondering what to do, where to go, who to turn to, how to take on this understanding of this level of injustice whilst suffering with 40 plus symptoms a day, not knowing if you'll ever make it out. That's probably the most accurate description I could give of my own experience with being on a prescribed benzodiazepine long term and the aftermath of that, which is a period of around 10 years in total. All of that from going to a doctor that I'd never seen before for a 10-minute, 15-minute appointment after one panic attack. And yet these are still being given out like candy, which comes on to the sort of question of what are the alternatives? What are the other solutions here? Because people are suffering and people are going to their doctors looking for help. So what challenges have you faced in advocating for more holistic treatments? Because I imagine that taking a stand and being a whistleblower means that you've received a lot of backlash in many ways. So how have you dealt with the challenges and how do you stand up to the critics?
I just kind of ignore the haters. It's like Joe Rogan says on his podcast, he's like post and coast. You just post and then you don't read the comments. I've had my fair share of death threats from doctors whose practices have been hindered by videos I've made that went viral. And you sort of just say like, wow, that's scary. Sometimes you report it to police if they like send you pictures of your house or whatever. But like for the most part, you just say like, this is the truth. This is my truth. And if people don't like it, so be it. Like when your complacency becomes big, smaller, and your conviction becomes greater, speaking out is easy. And that's really what it's about. It's like when your conviction is greater than your complacency, speaking out is a must. And when you've been injured, when you have patients who are injured, where it's killed people you've known dearly, when you've lost friends, when it's ruins people's lives, then it's really easy to talk about. And for some reason, we're willing to talk about the opiate crisis, but we're not willing to talk about benzos yet. We're willing to talk about physical health crises, but not mental health crises. So medicine is shifting, and it's shifting because of the internet, thank God, because patients have free public speech in most countries still, even though Canada is now limiting free speech and information. China limits a lot of that, and the censorship is only going up. I've been personally deleted multiple times off social media just for helping people to get better. So we really do have to Robin Hood healthcare back to the people, and we really do have to grassroots it. It is going to take a person-by-person approach, because the things that do go against what governments say and things that do go against what pharmaceutical companies say do get censored and shadow banned and deleted and blocked and banned and fact-checked all the time on social media. We saw that a lot during the pandemic. And we saw the governments have been proven guilty in court of colluding with social media companies and with technology companies and search engines. And the pharmaceutical and the government has basically shown to fund a lot of what people see and know. Even as far back as 2019, 2017, Google got some pharmaceutical money endowments, and the top search results for holistic remedies for even something as simple as like a cold or a flu got completely sent way down the line and lost 99% of their Google search traffic overnight. So people I know who I'm near and dear with basically lost their business, hundreds of their employees they had to let go because Google decided one day just to limit what people were seeing. So now people see things in the United States like Mayo Clinic and Medscape, and they see a few like approved sources of information, but the true good information is still getting censored, blocked, deleted, and shadow banned all over the place. And because you don't see it, you don't think it exists until you're really in it.
It's quite astonishing, really, isn't it? And I wasn't aware of that. And it's terrifying, but it does fire you up even more to sort of speak your truth and use your voice. I think we've grown up in a time where, especially in our societies and our generations, where we have grown up where we watch cartoons, we watch these movies, and sort of being brought up in a culture where we have these portrayals of happy endings and that the worst of humanity is in the past, and we've learned these lessons. And I think it, one, means that we have sort of grown up in a comfort zone, and two, makes it harder to believe that something of this scale can happen. So I think it makes it really hard for people to take a stand, especially when people are struggling with their own challenges and pressures, the pressures of work and the cost of living, and living in a technological age where we have access to all this information and news 24/7 that we've never had before. I think people are overwhelmed. And this is, again, another irony of the situation, that it's very hard for people to support other people and take a stand against something, against an injustice, when arguably most people, if not everybody, is dealing with some sort of mental health thing, as by society standard, at some point in their life. So I think it makes it really hard for A, people to understand, and B, to have the energy and capacity to fight. But it is a fight that has to be fought. And that's more apparent, like anything, when you've witnessed it personally. But we are at a point where everyone is at risk and may be affected in the future if they haven't already been, just because of the scale and the ongoing issues associated with this problem. As a side note, I really do hope that blockchain tech, which is a kind of intersection of, in my mind, truth and tech, can lead to some positive changes that sort of underpin some of these foundational issues related to this. But that's only if the gatekeepers lead the change or allow it to happen, and that's a whole other thing. What would you like to see change? And what are your hopes and beliefs for things that can change?
I think the future of healthcare globally is going to be a lot of people getting very sick very quickly. And I said this before the pandemic, and the pandemic has only expedited the process of this. But I think the younger generation is going to be so physically and mentally unwell that we're going to have to do something about it, because it's probably, aside from like a global war, it's the next biggest issue we have. And a lot of the issue is, the root is actually coming from the soil, the roots of the food that we're eating and what our animals are eating, our crops are eating, everyone lives off of the earth and the soil and the nutrients that provides to animals that we eat or plants that we eat. So I think the root of the issue is actually getting to regenerate healthier soil, which then creates healthier food, which then creates healthier people, and reconnecting people to nature, both the external nature of what does it mean to grow your own food, to, grow and use animals for sustenance, and getting back not to these extreme cultures of like vegan or carnivore or this diet or that diet, but just getting back to what it means to be a human in the circle of life, like the Lion King, living in harmony with nature. Because a lot of us are not living in harmony with nature. We're too into tech. We're in big cities. We're not connected to our food. We don't even know what an apple tree looks like versus like a grapevine. We don't even know where our food comes from. So I think getting connected with our food is primarily important for our health. Getting outside in nature with the sun and the sunset helps regulate sleep rhythms, and getting connected with our own inner nature, which is including all of the emotional spectrum that we have capacity for: grief, depression, sadness, anger, anxiety. Sometimes we want our lives to end. That's like a normal experience to be in that state from time to time as a human, because life can be hard and life includes suffering. So rather than medicate ourselves out of our humanity, we have to learn to accept our humanity, to feel our feelings, to acknowledge those things, and have more community around them. Because when people can have true, loving, healing physical and close relationships, they are comfortable talking about and experiencing those feelings in those community and in that relationship that they have. So I think what we're really lacking is connection to the earth, connection to nature, and connection to our own inner nature and each other. And so the more connection we have in real life, I think social media is a great tool. We can have connection through social media, through podcasts, through videos, through movies, etc. But we can't lose the physical connection that we've had and we've been born and raised on for tens of thousands of years. So we have to remember to disconnect to reconnect. And I think that will solve most of the problems. But as humanity gets sicker, we're going to need to find solutions. And the solution is in the connection.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. And I've often thought that this sort of tech revolution that we've gone through is perhaps somewhat similar to the Industrial Revolution and the impact that that had on the climate. I think there are similarities there in terms of scale and unknownness with the effect that the tech revolution is having on our mental health. As a species, we've never lived at a time where we're so connected but so disconnected. And that connection is a different quality to what we have been used to as we've evolved throughout time. So there's a real disconnection with the natural environment, the natural rhythms of life, and communities in a way that we just have not been used to. And we are really the first generations of humans that are disconnected as much as we are. And I don't think that's a coincidence that we have all these health issues that then arise, that then sadly aren't being dealt with in arguably the best ways. So yeah, everything you've said, I completely agree with, and it just makes sense. So moving on to the final few questions. How can patients and medical professionals today, how can they work together to promote a more holistic, patient-centered approach to healthcare?
I think the patients are going to have to find a doctor that spends more time with them, believes them, trusts them, listens to them, and know that even if the doctors believe them, they're going to have to find a doctor that spends at least 15 or 30 minutes in an appointment with them every visit to try to understand what's changed, what's new, what's going on. So they have to realize that they might have to break out of their normal system. They might have to pay out of pocket or save up money for some of these things, or they might have to join group healing type environments to support each other through this process. So I think the future has to be doctors that can spend more time with patients, or even nurse practitioners or psychiatric nurse practitioners, whatever it might be. But they have to get more care than just a short doctor visit once in a while. They can educate themselves as much as possible with that website we talked about, benzoinfo.com. Look up the Ashton Manual, do as much research as they possibly can on the topic themselves, because the more educated they become, the less dependent they'll be on a practitioner or the system. I think it's about you learning more than the practitioner, or trying to learn what they know and then trying to learn more than them. That's extremely crucial, because doctors are so overwhelmed around the world that they don't have time to sit down and educate you for 5-10 hours. But you can read books, you can watch videos, you can look at social media accounts and learn as much as possible. So you really have to take it into your own hands and then find a practitioner who can coach and guide you along the way.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And that goes into another avenue, which is perhaps a whole other conversation, which is the social aspect of this, which then becomes a sort of class issue as well, which has always been a thing with the healthcare system and other systems. But just because it's been a thing of the past doesn't mean we can't or shouldn't work to level the playing field and provide equal access, quality healthcare across the board, whether that's community-led groups and or individuals becoming more aware and having that information to hand because that information is free. The systems that allow you to go from, hey, I have this issue, to here's the treatment, that's another thing. But at least if we have that education and awareness at the core, then those fairer systems can hopefully grow in time. The last two questions for you. What are maybe the top 3 to 5 things that help you and that you'd recommend to other people with regards to physical health, mental health, and ultimately taking responsibility for your own health sovereignty?
The top things that somebody could do for improving and stabilizing their mental health is going to be eating enough protein. So getting at least 20 or 30 grams of protein in per meal. Sometimes even starting the day with 50 or more grams of protein can be profoundly helpful for someone's mental health. And working on getting more structure in their life. So first, probably eating more protein. Second is getting more structure. So a sleep schedule, something to do during the day, a routine, or something you find brings you purpose, whether it's like donating your time, charity, a job, an exercise class. You need some sort of like structure, routine, or schedule, and your sleep schedule can be on point, because that's something you can control. You can control your food to some degree. You can control your sleep schedule. The third thing would be getting outside for light. And the fourth thing would be some sort of exercise. I think we all could use more sunrise and sunset to help reset our circadian rhythms. And the more you're outside during the day as well, you get more melatonin naturally made in your skin that blood tests can't pick up, and supplemental melatonin will never impact. So your natural cortisol melatonin cycles are regulated by light. You're basically a delicate house plant with complicated emotions. So you need water, you need food, you need light. And without those basics, you'll never thrive. The last thing, number 5, that even houseplants need is love and connection. One of my patients who was dying said the meaning of life became very clear. It was the balance of love and time. And time without love is a tragedy, and love, I said it wrong. Love and time. Love without time is a tragedy, and time without love is a prison. So what we need is love more than anything else, more than protein, more than good food, water, and sunlight. If we have love, connection, and community, we can heal from just about anything. And even house plants, when you grow multiple plants next to each other, and if you were to talk and say curse words and slurs and negative things at one plant and say positive words and affirmations and loving, kind words to another plant, they will grow at different rates. And our bodies and our brains work the same way. So a brain that has stimulation from good connection, community, and loving relationships can grow and heal. And one that is isolated, alone, without those same relationships does not heal the same way. The people who live the longest, who have the happiest lives, the people who live over 100, it's usually not about whether they smoke or not, drink or not, whether they eat well or not. It's almost always about their relationships, their community, their connection, and their purpose. So we must always remember love is number one, forever, always, for all time.
I almost don't want to say anything after that, because I think that's just the perfect way to end. But I absolutely love the statement that we're just houseplants with emotions. I think that's definitely a great title for something. We have come to the last question, which is, what are your future goals and aspirations?
My goal, I'm trying to, Robin Hood healthcare back to the people. It's basically creating a grassroots movement of people who are ready, willing, and able to take back control of their health from the people who have stolen it from them. So educating as many people as possible on whatever they're ready, willing, and able to learn. So I've already reached tens of millions of people, like over 1% of the global population. But my next goal is to not just reach people, but to help them on a deep level and get thousands and millions of people to be educated on a deeper level, to get free access to our membership, to take some of the courses in there that are designed to help people discover and heal the root causes of their health issues, because we have to do it ourselves. Like, there's no savior coming for us. We can pray to medical doctors. We can hope that they're going to come save us. We can hope for a new medication, some new research that's going to save everybody from dementia. But the answers are pretty much all there. The way to be healthy has been known for thousands of years. We've just forgotten what it means to live a healthy lifestyle. And medical practitioners are never trained in how to heal a condition. The patient's body does the healing. The medical doctor often gets in the way. And we block and suppress signs of healing. We block and suppress inflammation. We block and suppress suffering emotionally. We block and suppress the processes that are actually supposed to help us change into better versions of ourselves and heal. Because inflammation is not the scary thing. Inflammation is our body trying to change a thought process, get out of a moldy house, change, stop eating toxic food, change, start moving your body, change, start sleeping, change, stop thinking a certain way. So inflammation is not this negative thing. Our body is not innately ignorant. Our body is innately intelligent. So we must start to see our bodies as powerful, innately intelligent entities and start learning how to support them as best as possible. And the world will get better.
I think that's a really positive note to leave on, especially in the face of very challenging times and times when a lot of people are scared for very good reason. But it's a reminder that that hope is always there. There are these healing modalities out there, and we are living in an internet age where all this information is available and accessible, including on your website and your profiles, which we'll make sure we link in the description with this episode and with the film when that's released. Dr. Campbell, Brad, thank you so much for sharing your time, your knowledge, your expertise today. And I know that this is going to help so many people, and I'm extremely grateful for being able to sit down with you and have this conversation, and really looking forward to seeing how your career evolves and how you continue to help people around the world, with the work that you do.
Thanks so much, Emma.